Good morning. This is the Blaine's World podcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And you can get more information and catch previous shows at my website, which is in the back there, www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce my guest today, and she is Crystal MacKinnon. And Crystal, you can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. So if you're watching, that's
Hello.
Crystal MacKinnon. If you're listening, you'll hear her speak. I should mention that Crystal grew up in South Texas, came to North Carolina in 2016 by way of Chicago to pursue opportunities to continue her education. She earned her BA in philosophy, followed by a master's in peace and conflict studies from UNCA Greensboro. Crystal is also a certified community mediator, and she works as an equity-focused communications consultant and strategist, and also founded and serves as the executive director of the Cellphone Project, a nonprofit working in partnership with other regional agencies, provides cell phones to marginalized community members otherwise unable to obtain one. Crystal serves on Asheville Peak Academy's board of directors and as secretary and vice chair on the advisory board of ABCCM's Costello House. And so certainly sounds like you keep busy, Crystal. But since the first time we've met, what it's like finding out is as a child, you grew up, you said in South Texas. That's where you grew up for the most part?
Yeah, I'm predominantly in Houston, but my mom is and maternal family is from Brownsville, Texas, which is the southmost part of the entire United States. There's a bridge to Mexico. It's a predominantly Mexican area, the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. So my family is from there, and I've lived there at times and in Houston. Then I moved to Chicago when I was 18, which is where my dad's from. Lived there for a long time and then came here.
And did you know when you were growing up, I guess in Houston and in Chicago as well, did you know you always want to be, I guess I might call you a community activist? You wanted to get active in the community?
Not at all. Never. I think we often joke in my family that if you had asked somebody 20 years ago, and I'm 40, just to give context, what do you think Crystal's going to be doing in 20 years? It would not be this. Not at all. So I just sort of, I think I went back to school when I was a little older. I had 3 years of college when I was in my, the traditional age, 18 to 21, but I didn't graduate. And then I was just, mainly just the type of person that had a job to live. And then, didn't really do much volunteer work or anything like that. And then when I went back to school in my early 30s, um, it was really just a transformative experience, both through undergrad and grad school. Excuse me. And the things that I got involved in and the way that my worldview shifted and my view of myself shifted and changed really just turned me down a completely different direction. And so, yeah, that's kind of how a little brief overview of how I got
And,
here. But
and so
I definitely wasn't always this way.
what did folks think you were going to be then when you were younger?
Probably nothing, Blaine.
Okay.
I mean, I'll just put it out there because it's most people know that in town that I have, well, not people in town, but certain people in certain circles, um, that I have been justice involved when I was in my mid 20s. I was incarcerated for a year and a half, and sort of spit back out into the world when I was about 30. So that obviously was a huge thing too. And I think, I mean, if we're talking about me and how I got to be where I am, that's an integral part of the entire story. Um, so I, I'm sorry, I lost the plot.
No, you were saying, I was asking how you got to be a kid, and growing up and nobody knowing what you're going to become, to all of a sudden now becoming active in
Oh,
the community and all this other
yeah.
cool stuff.
So then, like I said, I mean, truthfully, I think if you had, I wasn't heading anywhere particularly good. I had, trauma and issues and whatever, and obviously that all converged into, this horrible thing. Um, and then when I came home, I kind of meandered around for a few years. I mean, I was living with my mom in Brownsville, Texas, and then I decided to go back to school when I was 33. And I think all of those experiences and all of that is how I got here. But again, I don't think, I mean, 10 years ago, if you had asked even my own parents where I was going, they would not have seen this as the outcome, both educationally and in terms of, the kind of work that I do and the things that I'm involved in.
And that's really cool that I guess you changed your life around and certainly moved in a different direction. I guess that segues into something which I read about, I guess, in the papers, and I said that sounded really cool. And it's that cell phone, the cell phone project you're involved in. And what exactly is that?
So the Cellphone Project is a nonprofit. We serve, of course, we're located in Asheville in Buncombe County, but we also work with agencies in Hendersonville, Haywood, Swain, and Jackson County. And we want to keep kind of expanding on that. But so I think it's easier to explain it by just talking about how the idea was incepted, which is I was working on a political campaign in the last cycle. And after the election in last November in 22, it was like, what am I going to do? Where am I going? And I really wasn't sure. So I was volunteering at Code Purple, which for anybody that's unfamiliar, when temperatures drop below freezing, then several shelters, one for men, one for
Okay.
women, open up, and they're pretty much dependent on volunteers to run them. So volunteering in the women's facility, which is housed at Transformation Village, which is part of ABCCM. Uh, I started meeting women, and that was new to me. I had never done it. Um, I started meeting women, and so a lot of it's just literally sitting around with them, in the dorm or whatever you want to call it. So, naturally, there's a lot of conversations. You have dinner with them, etc. And I observed that certain people had cell phones and certain people didn't, and it was really a huge impediment to their ability to do anything about their situation. Um, Even to get into Transformation Village, for example, which is a residential facility for women and children, one must call in every Tuesday to remain on the wait list. So it's also just simply hard to keep track of your days, the bus schedule, anything. I mean, people can't find you. Your case manager at the housing authority or at Homeward Bound or whoever's trying to house you literally has to go out in the street looking for you.
And like you
Uh,
said, you're so on target because that's the very first question everybody asks, what's your cell phone number? And so
right,
if you don't
right.
have a cell number,
Yeah,
you're out of luck.
you certainly wouldn't be able to get a job or just anything. I mean, maybe you've got family. I mean, they can't find you, whatever. It goes on and on. I always say the simplest thing, what if you couldn't call 911?
Good
What if
point.
that was not an option for you? That's unimaginable, right? So I was just thinking about it, and I was like talking to one particular woman. Her name is Stephanie, and she's actually a heavily woven into the whole cell phone project story. And we just kind of clicked. I don't know what it is. Sometimes people stand out to you, and we she was expressing to me how difficult it was because she didn't have a phone, and I was like, well, my dad's old iPhone is just sitting in our shared office, and I can just get one of those prepaid cards at Walmart and give it to you. And so I did. The next day I met her somewhere that we planned downtown at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I gave it to her. And that really was a critical piece of how she was able to start pulling all the different strings together to get housed. She was able to start keeping up with her therapy appointments at RHA and her case manager at RHA, because if you don't comply with what RHA, just as an example, and most agencies are like this, with whatever their program requirements are, then they can't help house you. So if you don't have a phone, you don't even know what day it is, and nobody can find you, you're definitely not going to have an easy time participating meaningfully in the program, which is also part of your own healthcare. It's hard to literally participate in your own healthcare if you don't have a phone. So I kind of just, over the couple months that I witnessed her with the phone and we stayed in touch, and all of the developments that occurred as a result of the phone, we, her and I, through talking to her, through sort of doing some research in the community to see, is anyone providing phones? If so, how? If so, to who? While there is some giving out of phones, it was not in any county but this one, and it was like just specific groups of people. Like, for example, Operation Gateway gives phones to folks who are being released from incarceration. um, you know, Eleanor House may have health, excuse me, may get a grant and be able to give out 100 phones, but there's no consistent means of access. And even when there is, it's only enough for a handful of people, really. So that was kind of where the entire thing came from. And
Well,
I
by the way, when was that?
that was December of last year, that we, in 2022, that I incorporated it. And then I think it took us about 6 months from there to really develop the program, build our board of directors, get our 501c3 tax exemption status, etc., and just get our ducks in a row. We did a lot of beta testing, as far as like what kind of phones and what service, and just how do we distribute them, who are our partners, things like that. And so we were serving people starting in December, but it was slow. And then in July, I would say, when we got our 501c3, we're now serving 50 to 75 families a month. By families, I mean sometimes it's one member of family and sometimes it's an individual.
And talk about, you said you're serving them. So talk about what actually happens then. So we hear about the telephone project on Blaine's World, or you hear someplace else, and sounds kind of cool. You don't have a cell phone. What do you do at that point in time?
So we mainly work by referral. Um, so like a good example that I think most people, a lot of people, at least in this region, would have heard of would be Homeward Bound.
Okay, sure.
So we work in partnership with Homeward Bound and Our Voice, and we actually work with Buncombe County Justice Resource Center, and a whole bunch of other places, but we kind of go back to that. So we work by referral. So if you are a client of one of our referring partners, they can refer you to us because of different reasons. We have certain parameters. I like to think of our program as mainly focusing on folks that are in a crisis inflection point in their life, but they're also actively seeking to get out of it. So, for example, with Homeward Bound, like with the Compass Point, which folks may know as the old Days Inn on Tunnel Road, which is their new facility that's just opened, as they've just been starting to get people moved in, they needed phones for those folks in the weeks coming up to the move-in date so that they could find them when it was time to move in. So we provided them with a lot of phones for that purpose. Like again, we work with Our Voice. So a victim of sexual violence, assault, human trafficking, etc., can go to them. If you're their client, they can refer you to us.
And so if you go to one of those agencies, then you work with them, very good agencies, and then they find out your needs. And if they find out you need a cell phone, then what is it? They contact you, and then you get them the cell phone, or how does that work?
So we have they make a referral, which is just a simple form, and then we provide we use refurbished phones. I think
Sure.
that's one thing that's unique, because I found that a refurbished phone that was a phone of quality, like an iPhone 7, um, will last longer and outperform a really cheap new phone, like a $60 phone that's new. So we get those donations from community members, but also from uh, corporations that, for example, provide company phones. So when they do a mass device upgrade, they will have tons of phones that they don't know what to do with. Anyways, so we provide then that person, the individual, with a refurbished smartphone that's compatible with, the modern networks, 4G, 5G. Of course, we give them a charger, and then we give them 3 months of service on that phone. We also provide a dry bag for folks that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, to literally protect it from the elements, or unfortunately phones get stolen a lot when people shower
Yeah.
at shelters. And so I always tell folks, put it in the dry bag and literally take it into the shower. The dry bags we give out are like for scuba diving, so they can be fully submerged in water. Um, and so, yeah, and then they get their 3 months of service. And if they need an additional 3 months, we can provide that, but they have to go back to the whoever referred them. We give the phone typically to that person's case manager at whatever agency referred them. And the reason that we do that is to try to minimize the responsibility placed on the participant, as the vulnerable person in the equation, which is we don't want to be one more number for them to
Sure.
call, one more place they have to show up at some certain time, and all this other stuff. So we find that if we just work with their case manager, their social worker, whatever it is, that then we get them the phone, and then they provide it to the client, to the end user, during a normal interaction, so that we don't place an extra burden on the individual receiving the phone.
What happens after the 3 months?
So they have the option to um, keep their number and roll it over to the consumer side of our carrier for a pretty good price, with no credit check, which I think is
Right.
important. The pricing on that, it depends a lot on how much data the individual needs, but I always say if you're careful, you really don't need much because I myself have 1 gigabyte of data a month because I'm always on Wi-Fi and I don't stream and watch videos when I'm not. Um, and so it's manageable. And for 1 or 2 gigabytes, they can have a monthly plan for about $10. And then even all the way up to going to an unlimited, it's about 25 with our carrier, and they can keep their same number, and the device is theirs, whatever they choose to do with it. Literally, like they can trade it in. I mean, I can't control what people do with them after they go into their hands because they then own it. So we do like to be able to give people that option because I advise folks against going back to using a prepaid cards because I'm sure people have heard this saying, it's expensive to be poor. And prepaid plans are across the board going to cost you more than having like a plan through a carrier.
Well, and I think you said that the key is, I guess you have to show people that they don't have to have all this data that's offered. You being a very good example, and then unfortunately, of course, I guess a lot of people don't know how to use Wi-Fi even, and don't even know that that's a tremendous way to not have to pay for data, so I guess part of a learning curve.
Yeah.
Curious, in terms of, I'm looking at you, where are these phones stocked, or do you just drive them back and forth and, in other words, the logistical aspects of this, where's this run out of?
Um, right here in my house, we don't store the devices here.
Gotcha.
We store them off site for just security reasons. Um, but the main operation is here. We have one employee other than myself. And actually, this is like a full circle moment because our employee is Stephanie, who was the very first
Very
person to
exciting.
get home. And she's incredible. And I always have to say, to her credit, I did not hire her because she's my friend or because I wanted to help her or anything like that. I hired her because she was volunteering of her own volition because she's very passionate about the cell phone project. And I realized how much of an asset she was. And then when we had the funding available to hire someone, it just made sense to me to hire her. I was like, it would be harder to hire someone else because I'd have to train them. She already knows the program, and we just kind of have like a real like rhythm together when we're working, and we just work so well together, and she's such an asset. And I personally, like, it's kind of cheesy in a way, but I think I love the fact that the woman who was the very first person I gave a phone to and was the inspiration and the impetus for the entire thing is now employed by us. Yeah, I think
Now,
it's
now talk about the size of the project. So you mentioned before that it's primarily in Asheville now, but you go beyond Asheville. Talk about where you serve and how large the area you serve is.
Um, so I mean, the bulk of it is in Buncombe County because of I think the just logistical realities of that being where I am, and also we're a bit of a service hub in Western North Carolina anyway. But we also work in Haywood County, predominantly with Friendship House, which is also kind of Helping Hands of Haywood, which is Nicole Cott, for those who know her. She's a pretty prominent community member, I would say, in this region in general. And we work in Henderson County with Hope Center, Love and Friendship, and I think also Blue Ridge Health. So then we've got a couple of smaller scale projects that we're sort of testing in Swain and Jackson County. Those look more like in Swain County, for example, some of these counties, they're extremely under resourced when it comes to housing, vulnerability, homelessness, etc. So we're working with a soup kitchen in Jackson County, or I'm sorry, in Swain County, called the Giving Spoon, and they identified 5 people that they thought would be good recipients, like in terms of would really utilize the phone as a tool to, do their best to resolve their situation. And so we're still in sort of like a testing phase there, seeing what happens, how big of an impact it made. So our main presence is Buncombe, Henderson, and Haywood, I would say, but we want to keep expanding to whatever extent we're able to, because again, a lot of the less populated counties are very under resourced, but it doesn't mean that they don't have poverty and homelessness. And homeless folks are not our only um, target either. I mean, we also work with DSS involved parents who don't have the luxury of time to get a phone from one of the government programs, etc. They don't qualify. We work with kids aging out of foster care with Elida Health, and people in recovery programs, residential programs. So I just wanted to clarify while I was on that homelessness is not a prerequisite. It's more so like a particular type of vulnerability that is the general prerequisite.
Now, let me ask you in terms of moving forward with this. So this is now certainly mostly in Western North Carolina. Is this both in the state and then talk about elsewhere? So are there other similar kinds of programs throughout the state of North Carolina, or is this the only one you know
of? There are, this is just to the best of my knowledge. I don't know of any other program that focuses on cell phones. I know of some programs that focus on laptop devices and computer devices, and then they may do phones a little bit, or they may, not, but it's nothing that, to my knowledge, I don't believe us to be duplicating the services of any other agency in the region. And I mean, or just I don't know of another organization that does what we do specifically anywhere. That doesn't mean they don't exist. I might just be really bad at Googling, but I don't.
No, very cool. Because let me ask you then, in terms of down the road, what's your vision of this, both in terms of North Carolina, Western North Carolina specifically, and then do you see it going beyond this area?
I think so, for sure. I don't know what would that look like. I don't know, as far as being that we're nonprofit. It can look like different things. It can look like partnership. It can look like helping groups in other municipalities to replicate your model, or it can look like um, coming into other areas. I think like the concept I would love to see proliferate as much as possible throughout the country, anywhere really. I think it's probably needed in a lot of places, if not everywhere. But I don't know that I see our program specifically running some sort of national operation. I see it more as, again, uh, we're testing a model and a concept that's fairly new. And if we do it for enough time and it's successful and we have sort of proven impact in the community, then that model theoretically could be replicated elsewhere. And we could give guidance to, again, other groups, other organizations. But I think one of the things about Western North Carolina that were kind of, to me, I know Western North Carolina. I know our people. I know like all the agencies and the counties and the different stuff. And I think having somebody on the ground who's very familiar with the community is kind of an important part of how we can remain functional and agile and effective and actually get outcomes. Because as my friend Nicole Cott says, there's a difference between output and outcome. So we could say I gave out 100 phones, but okay, to what end? I mean, what came of that? How many of those people are now housed or in recovery or, whatever it looks like?
For you, this must have been quite a learning experience to go from your background to just the idea of starting a nonprofit from scratch. I mean, that's a big undertaking unto itself. How'd you go about doing that? You just researched the heck out of it, or how'd you become knowledgeable?
Well, I kind of started really by putting together my board. And I think the fact that some of the folks, the folks on my board were willing to be on the board of a startup project gave me confidence that they had faith in the project, and they, as individuals with their different skill sets, connections, etc., provided a lot of guidance because we formed immediately. Some people build their project out and then
Exactly.
I did it the other way around. I came up with sort of the idea and like a rough sketch of it, and then I built my board by asking people that I knew or through networking and stuff if they wanted to support this project. So they really, I think, provided a lot of the backbone as far as guidance, and a lot of it was just researching, lots of trial and error.
Had you ever started a nonprofit before?
Yeah.
Okay, because again, I'll just share with anybody listening to this, uh, the fact that you deserve a lot of credit because that's a big undertaking, that the first time you do it, so that you got it off the ground is just incredible. If folks specifically want to find out more about the Cellphone project, we'll talk about some other cool stuff you're involved in. What's the best bet to find out more information?
Well, they can go to our very simple website, which is tcpavl.org. I made it myself because we are very conservative with our funds.
Right.
So think of it as an informational website. It's
Okay. But what is that website again then?
tcpavl.org.
Okay. So if folks want to find out more, this is the first step they can go to check out that website. And again, they can also check, and I guess the website lists all the organizations you team up with to get.
It actually currently doesn't, but that's coming
Okay.
soon.
Okay. But they can listen to the show again then, and we listed some of them on the show itself. And what's cool, I think, Crystal, about you is that aside from doing this, in your spare time, you're also involved in several other community activities as well. And I call it spare time. It doesn't sound like you have much spare time, but talk a little bit about the one I'm familiar with. ABCCM does some fantastic work. What's your work involved with them?
So I'm on the advisory committee board, whatever you want to call it, of Costello House, which is a fairly new program, but used to be called Steadfast House, and it's under ABCCM. It's part of ABCCM, but it's just one specific program. And so it was Steadfast House, which was a house, residential facility for women and children. When ABCCM opened Transformation Village a couple of years ago, that took its place, and they were looking to sell the property, and a gentleman named Mike Costello bought the property and rented it back to us for $1 because he wanted to see a men's facility there. So we are basically the residential civilian facility for men in the ABCCM universe. So these are folks that are not veterans, otherwise they would be able to be at veterans quarters.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And it's also specifically a recovery program. So all of our guys are in active recovery, and they stay there for anywhere from, well, it's up to a year. And I think there's last I know, there was about 25 men living there. It's located kind of in between Montford and North Asheville. I'm not sure exactly where those lines are drawn, but
And so folks want to find out more about the Costello House. First of all, before that, so what do you do with Costello House? You're on the advisory board, you mentioned?
So on the advisory board, it's a little different than a board of directors, in that we don't get into financials and legal and all that stuff. We just meet once a month, and kind of our job is to be good stewards of the program in the community, and also to workshop the program, different changes, different approaches, things that we can do, not from a clinical perspective, but kind of just putting all our heads together to say, how can we assist this in succeeding? And that can look like a lot of things. I mean, one thing that we're asked to do that I try to do, we aren't always good at this, but we try to bring a community member that might be interested or find this relevant to take a tour and to visit the facility and to learn about our program and why it differs from other programs and things like that. Just help problem solve. Essentially, we're a steering committee, I guess you could say, for the executive director of Costello House.
And talk about one other thing you're involved in. So one other thing you're involved in lots of different things, but also I read something called the Peak Academy. I have to admit, I'm not familiar with Peak Academy. If you would, what is it?
So Peak Academy is a public charter school.
Oh, okay.
And I know that people have a lot of opinions about charters, but I think Peak differs in some really material ways from your average charter. The mission of Peak Academy is to close the achievement gap, because the achievement gap in Asheville, Buncombe County, is one of the worst in the state, for economically underserved and people of color. So that's the mission of the school. And right now we have about 170 students. The school's been open for 3 years, I believe. It's K through 5. And there's some preliminary numbers this year. I don't have them in front of me, but I think we are literally closing the gap. And that, I think, comes from breaking a lot of the paradigms that public schools unfortunately are plagued by, that serve to, whether intentionally or inadvertently, suppress and oppress economically disadvantaged children and children of color.
So how did you get involved in this one?
Blaine, I don't even know. I think it was I was serving with the one of the members on the board of Costello, and Peak needed a new member, and they were looking for somebody Latino specifically, so that that community would have some representation. And I know I may not look like it, but I am. And so, yeah, I mean, I talked to a few people about it. I was asked if I was interested, and I was definitely. And so I think I've been doing it since June or July, so it's pretty new to me. But I'm very involved. I'm very passionate about it. I think it's just interesting to note that I think it's 72% of our kids um, reside in housing authority properties. So these are folks that are seriously underserved in the public system, unfortunately. So I think Peak is, it's sort of like an experiment, but it's working. And I think that it could really be a model for other communities as well, on how to, you know, sorry, I'm starting to
No, you're cool.
lose
Let,
the
let,
plot.
let me jump in here then. So we have Peak, we have these other projects as well. Let me ask you the question we started off with, Crystal. You talked earlier about 10 years ago what you're going to be doing, and nobody could quite see that. I want to put you on the spot now. 10 years from now, what do you see yourself involved in? Or do you have anything you'd like to be involved in?
I, at this point, really would like to just be involved in the same things on a bigger scale. I want the Cellphone project to get much bigger and to be able to continue expanding the scope of folks that we serve, that we're able to serve. Um, I want to see Peak become a high school as well. Um, and if they'll allow me, I'd like to still be there. And I think, probably just other similar projects. I'm very, very invested in this community. I know I'll still be here. That I know for sure. I don't have any specific aspirations. Like, I definitely would never run for office. Um, One of my personal catchphrases is I'll never spend another day of my life making somebody else money. So,
I like that.
um, if I was really fantasizing, I'd like to get a PhD, but that's probably not going to happen just because we don't have anywhere like locally with a program that I would be appropriate for me. But other than that,
Crystal,
um,
to recap, if I can, then, so let's just go back to where we started. So, in terms of, first of all, the Cellphone project, best bet for people to get information about that is just check out the website, I guess, and they'll find some general information.
yeah, and they can also email info at the cellphoneproject.org.
Okay, one way. And I guess for the other two things that Costello House and Peak Academy, they could just look that up on Google and find information about both those.
Absolutely.
Okay. I just want to thank you for all the stuff you're getting involved in. It's just like almost like overwhelming to me. It's just kind of really cool that you just kind of take an idea and it seems you just run with it, which is, I guess, the Cellphone project from
Yeah.
nothing to, shortly a couple of years after you're rock and rolling on it. So thank you for all you do. This is great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for expressing interest in the different stuff that I'm involved in, especially the Cellphone project.
Well,
I really appreciate it, and I myself always tell people that I too am shocked, and they're like, "You always said it was going to work," and I was like, "Yeah, but I didn't believe it either." I mean,
Well, whatever you do, just keep up the good work. Hopefully, we'll actually bump each other sometime in person in the near future. If you would just stay with me here, I'm going to sign off and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.